Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swagglehos. And in this video, we got ourselves a very special one here today because we are taking a look at the top sold comics based on some very cool infographics coming off of the Shortboxed app. Yes, that is right. Shortboxed released their year-end sales charts, all sorts of fun data to pull from, to look at, to see what are some of the most popular sold characters this year, the most popular comic books that went for sale. And they put together this nifty little infographic set that we're going to take a look at here together today. And I thought that this would be really fun content to do, interesting information to cover. And you guys might find this actually helpful to see what are some of the most in-demand books, at least based on the Shortboxed app. But of course, before we get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate it. Help support the channel, doing those things. But let us get into this video here today. Now, here are some of the infographics that I pulled up. You'll have to forgive me. I pulled these from the Shortboxed social posts, so they don't have the highest resolution, but I think it's enough to give you guys the picture. I'm just going to go through each chart one by one here. There are 7 for us to take a look at, and I'm going to add some context while also, of course, sharing with you the information that they put forward. So the first one that we need to take a look at here are the top 10 most popular characters. Now, this is based on all of the eras: Golden Age, Modern Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, et cetera, just all of the books that relate to these characters. Which characters sell the most based on volume? Well, of course, coming in there at the number 1 spot is probably no surprise, but it actually is Spider-Man. Number 2 is X-Men. Number 3 is Batman. Now, I think that, of course, there's going to be a heavy bias based on, the most sold characters are clearly always going to be the most popular characters, because there's going to be a snowball effect. If there are more comic books that have Spider-Man in it, then there's going to be more chances for his comic book to actually be sold. But that should also be an indication that this character is just that much more in demand, that he requires, multiple lines of comics to be made after him, decade after decade after decade. So of course, there's going to be more sales for this character because they're more popular. All right, let's round it here. Number 4 is actually Star Wars. That's a very interesting one. The only non-superhero sort of title character that we can put into this bucket. And I really think that that's where, Star Wars shines in the Bronze Age and the Modern Age. I think, modern keys for Star Wars have become very, very popular in the last, 4 years or so. And then there's still a lot of, original trilogy collectors that love to have the original Bronze Age set from the 70s. Number 5 there is actually Wolverine. Apparently last year, Avengers, which you see in the number 6 slot, was actually number 5, and Wolverine had jumped the Avengers. That one is actually surprising. I would have thought that Wolverine would always have been above the Avengers, but I suppose there's some modern keys where the Avengers maybe starts to pull away a little bit. Coming in at the number 7 spot is Fantastic Four. That's a little bit surprising that Fantastic Four is behind Avengers. But again, this is aggregating all of the ages. So even if Fantastic Four Silver Age is more popular than Avengers Silver Age, maybe the Avengers starts to pull ahead with Bronze and Modern. And then coming in at the number 8 spot is actually Venom, followed by number 9, Spawn. I think that that is a very interesting 1-2 punch right there, because you have to consider that Venom and Spawn weren't created until, the late 80s / early 90s. So they really only have Copper and Modern to pull from. So that should be an indication to you guys that Venom and Spawn are extremely popular. Like, as far as the volume of books that sell for these characters, to be in the top 10, having had such a further start than all of the other characters in front of them, definitely goes to show that these are very, very in-demand characters. And then coming in there at the number 10 spot is actually Superman, which I think is really surprising, because obviously Superman, in a lot of ways, the number 1 superhero there is in all of comic books. I think the problem with his character is that, Golden Age Superman, awesome books to collect, in my opinion. And then Silver Age, still a lot of cool keys in there. But all of that stuff is very, very expensive. So it's going to be hard for people to make purchases on them. And then I think you lose a lot of Superman keys throughout the Bronze Age, and then even into the Copper Age. He becomes less popular of a character. So probably just not as much demand in the later years. All right, let's move on now to the next graphic here. And this is actually comics sold by age. Now, I was actually kind of talking a little bit about this in the last graphic, but it's kind of not surprising to see that the modern age is actually the most sold age there is out there for two reasons. One, the census for modern age is going to be a lot higher than that of golden age, for instance. So there's just more opportunity to buy and sell those types of books, which is going to pad the stats. And then number two, they're just not going to be as valuable as the golden age. So there's going to be a more frequent, volume and turnover for a lot of those books. People can buy a $50 modern age comic book or $100 modern age comic book, not as many golden age keys that are of that price range. Now, the interesting thing to talk about that was actually highlighted in the infographic is that modern age last year actually had 60% of the market share, and this year actually shrunk down to 55%. So, definitely a pullback of people buying modern keys, which I think, is kind of anecdotally true. We can sort of tell that people were looking to, the less rare, the less common stuff in this last year as prices have corrected. And then one of the other interesting things is that the Silver Age number actually grew a little bit this year. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the Silver Age, the prices have corrected so much that there are now more people that are able to afford some of those silver keys. All right, moving on now to the next infographic here. We have top 10 most frequently sold books. So unlike most popular characters, these are actually the most popular individual books. And I think already from, just at a glance, you guys are going to see that there's definitely a bias towards census here as far as like what books sell the most. I think this is obvious. Like, you're just not going to see, 100 action ones sell in any given year. There's just not enough out there for those books to actually move. So that's why you're going to have a heavy bias towards modern and copper age keys. But let's go through them one by one. At the number one spot, you have X-Men #1. That is the Jim Lee version, the 1991 version. This is something I actually talk about a lot in anytime I do trending lists or cover, go collect hot lists and things like that. I always mention that, even though we have these trending lists, that's like, yeah, Dazzler is the #1 character trending this week. I mean, if these lists wanted to be actually honest, the #1 book every single week would be X-Men #1, because the Jim Lee X-Men books literally sell hundreds and hundreds a week. It is insane how much that book moves. And that book could essentially be the #1 book on every single hot list every week. But, that would be boring to talk about. Now, the interesting thing here is in the #2 spot, Marvel's Superhero Secret Wars #8. Of course, that's the origin of the black suit. A lot of people think that it's the first appearance of the black suit, but I think that's been disproven. ASM 252 is kind of the main go-to book for that. But this is still the iconic cover that a lot of people love. And it's interesting to see that book is actually the #2 most bought and sold book out there in the market. I mean, there's a ton of them out there. There's a lot on the census, but it is still a book that everybody wants to have in their collection. So there's always a high demand for it. Coming in at the #3 spot is everybody's favorite book, Ultimate Fallout #4. Of course, the first appearance of Miles Morales. I think that is a little bit surprising, but maybe also not surprising. I mean, Miles is a huge character. There's going to be a lot of sales for that book all the time. So it makes sense as to why it was on that list. I have to wonder if it was a little bit inflated this particular year because we had the movie come out. #4 spot, Wolverine, the limited series #1. That's the Frank Miller cover. Of course, that one is always a hot book. We have #5 there, Spider-Man #1, 1990. That's the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, followed by #6, Spawn #1. So a lot of Todd McFarlane fans always are going to be buying up comic books. And then again, #7, ASM 300, which of course is another Todd McFarlane one. So Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, the books that you think are popular and sell a lot are definitely popular and sell a lot. Here you have the data to prove it. Coming in there at the #8 spot, Something is Killing the Children #1. That's an interesting one, probably the biggest spec book on the list this past year. And that could have been a lot to do with the fact that they had the Netflix announcement. And then the final two to round it out, Uncanny X-Men #266, the second appearance of Gambit right there. And then Edge of the Spider-Verse #2, the first appearance of Gwen Stacy, or Spider-Gwen, I should say. Only other little things to add on this is that two books that fell off the list from last year were New Mutants '98 and Venom Lethal Protector #1. Still very, very popular books, but ones that did not make the top 10 this year. All right, going a little more into the weeds right here, we have percent of transactions by publisher. Of course, Marvel in the number one spot at 65%. Only little interesting thing to point out is that last year, Marvel's percentage was actually 67%. And I think DC was one that jumped up by 1%. So, you had the James Gunn effect this year. A lot of people kind of specking on those DC characters and things like that. So DC closed the gap a little bit. But of course, the big two are still the big two. Even on the secondary market, they are going to be the ones that sell the most, followed by Image, which of course makes sense. The Image seems to be the number 3. And then Boom and Dark Horse and IDW make a lot of sense as well. And then I think the interesting one to talk about is Mirage and EC Comics, which actually make up 1%. I mean, EC Comics making up 1% is really, really interesting to see that because, when we talk about Golden Age census, it's a really, really low percentage of the overall comic book market. And it's cool to see that a Golden Age thing or entity can actually make it into some of these graphs right here based on volume of sales. I've talked about before in doing my comic book index that it's very, very hard to do a Golden Age index because the values would be too swingy. They don't sell often enough, and it would just really, really be hard to calculate. But I have put some thought to it, and I think if I did do a Golden Age index, it would probably just be an EC index because I think EC has enough books out there that move enough. They're kind of known enough, common enough. All those weird science, weird fantasy, Tales from the Crypt, titles like that I could actually probably curate some list for us to sort of figure out what the state of the Golden Age is. I'll have to put some brain power to it, but I do think that if I was going to do it, EC would be the one that I would focus on. All right, moving on now to the next chart, we have CGC versus CBCS, 96% volume for CGC versus the 4% for CBCS. Now, there is some caveats here. I think that the Shortboxed app probably has a bit of a CGC bias because they actually show values and recent sales and things like that on their app. And they actually don't usually use the CBCS values in that. And that's like industry wide. GPA doesn't count CBCS sales, for instance. They only focus on CGC. So I think there's always going to be a graded bias towards that. But you can actually see that, the lion's share of the market definitely goes to CGC. That is still the brand, even in the wake of everything happening with CGC, that is still the brand that people most trust. And, in this calendar year, they actually said that the CGC market share went up by 2%. So last year it was 94%, and then it jumped up to 96%. It'll be interesting to see next year where the numbers go from there. If CGC loses a little bit of brand trust, due to all the reholder scams and things going on. All right, second to last graph before we get to the last one, which I actually think is maybe the most interesting one to talk about and maybe the most helpful if you're somebody out there who is a buyer or a seller. But let's go through this one here. Percent of transactions by label. Of course, universal grades, aka blue labels, are going to make up the majority of comic books that sell out there, 92%. The other labels, 1%, the 1% is probably green and restored books. And then 7% in the number 2 spot for signed books. That is actually a percentage that was mentioned went up this year. And I think that has to do with all of the CGC signings, the Todd McFarlane signings, the Frank Miller signings. I mean, I've done videos about it on the channel this year about how many CGC signings there were. So there were a lot of people, when you think about those ASM 300s and Spawn number 1s and stuff that want those Todd McFarlane signed books. So that percentage actually went up. And it'll be curious to see if that percentage actually continues to go up as we have more signings in the future. All right, let's move on now to the last infographic to take a look at here. And this one I think is maybe the most telling as far as comic book interest and demand is concerned. This is the top 10 searches on the Shortboxed app. Unlike the other charts that have a bias towards volume and actual sales, this is actually going to be a really good indication of what people are actually interested in looking for. So let's go through them one by one. Coming in at the number 1 spot is maybe no surprise, Hulk 181. Of course, the first full appearance of Wolverine, a book that everybody wants to have in their collection. I mean, say what you will about this book. Maybe you think it's overinflated. Maybe you think there's too many on the census. Either way, everybody wants this one book. This past year, of course, we did get a lot of the Hugh Jackman stuff with Deadpool, so that probably inflated this book quite a bit. But maybe not surprising to see that this is the most searched after book out there in the comic book market. Of course, number 2 and 3, this makes a lot of sense to me as well. Ultimate Fallout number 4, a lot of people always searching for that book. Ultimate Fallout 4 was one of the most sold books this year. New Mutants 98, again, the Deadpool stuff. That was a big part of the rumor mill, the news mill this whole year. Ryan Reynolds and Dazzler and Taylor Swift and all that stuff. So it doesn't surprise me that people are always looking at New Mutants 98s. Coming in at number 4, Wolverine the Limited Series number 1. Number 5, Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars number 8. Number 6, a very interesting one there, X-Men number 1. Now that could be for Jim Lee, X-Men number 1, but I wouldn't be surprised if X-Men number 1, the Silver Age book, also made up a large share of people searching for that one. Another hugely popular Silver Age book that everybody wants to have in their collection. Number 7 right there, another Silver Age book, Fantastic Four number 48. Another huge Silver Age key. Number 8, Spawn number 1. I guess, it does sell a lot. People got to actually type it into the search. Number 9 right there, that is a very interesting one. Amazing Fantasy 15. Again, like Hulk 181, like FF48, like X-Men number 1, AF15 is going to be another book that everybody wants to have in their collection. So everyone's always going to be looking for it and searching for it on every selling platform there is, including the Shortboxed app. And then coming in at the number 10 spot, another Silver Age key, Daredevil number 1. Another first appearance of a top 10 character that, while, it is relatively expensive depending on your budget, everybody would like to have in their collection. Well, that is all for this video. That was the infographics coming off of the Shortboxed selling app. What did you guys think of this? I think it's always really, really fun to look at these year-end infographics to, have us see this sort of data that can actually prove what we sort of empirically know to be true. I mean, we all know that Spider-Man and Batman are going to be some of the most sold characters out there, but it's actually cool to get the data to actually validate what we think is actually going to be true. Very, very cool to see all this information. Now, it is not to say that these are the books that are going to take you to the moon. It's not to say that these are the books that everyone should be buying up. No, it just goes to show you that if you're somebody out there who finds these books at discount, or you're somebody who picks up a collection and you have a Secret Wars number 8 in the collection that you pick up, you're probably not going to have any issue moving that book in the secondary market because there is a ton of demand for it. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Those were the top most sold books out there on the Shortboxed app. What did you guys think about the data you saw? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you on the next one.